I left the Brazil MTC on September 7th from the MTC's in São Paulo, and that's actually Brazilian Independence Day. So everybody joked like, "You're free from the MTC." So we woke up early in the morning in São Paulo, which is a huge city, gigantic city, and we rode on a bus to the airport and we flew to Porto Alegre. Porto Alegre is the capital of the state of Rio Grande do Sul, which is the state where the Santa Maria mission is. And we arrived there in Porto Alegre and got off our planes, and there were the two assistants to pick us up, and they were there just waiting in the airport, and they brought us over to a little mini van shuttle thing that they had brought over from the mission headquarters. So Santa Maria is right in the middle of the state, and it's about 5 hours away from the capital, Porto Alegre. And so we got on the shuttle and they just took us off to Santa Maria, and it was about a 5-hour drive. The assistants, the assistants to the mission president, they kind of gave us a talk about some of the mission rules and whatnot, talked to us a little bit about the mission. They gave us really good sandwiches. And we just kind of drove through the Brazilian countryside. The land, the region is there's a lot of farming there in southern Brazil. Lots of like alfalfa farming and whatnot, and soy farming. So we'd just be driving in basically the middle of nowhere, just with beautiful rolling hills around us for miles and miles. And so we drove for 5 hours. We got there to Santa Maria, and I got out of the little van shuttle thing they had, and they dropped us off at the bus station at first, so we could leave all of our bags in the bus station, because we'd be getting them the next day when we went to our areas. And I just remember thinking to myself, wow, this city is so small. Because I had just been in Sao Paulo, which is a city of like 17 million people or something like that. And one of the secretaries, he said to me, "No, man, this city is way big." And I was like, "I don't think so, man. This looks pretty small compared to where I've been, because Sao Paulo is huge." And so we left our bags, and then we went to the mission president's home and spent some time there. We had dinner at the mission president's house, and we met our trainers who were there, and we had a little meeting there. Then we went to this place that was called the Casa Grande, the big house. And I don't know if they still have it anymore, but this is the secretary's house. And in their garage, they have like 10 bunk beds. And that's where all the missionaries would sleep during transfers or when they're getting on the mission, leaving the mission. And so we slept there. The next day, we went off to our areas. We had our assignments. And so I got on another bus for another about 6 hours to a town called Quaraí, which is right on the border with Uruguay. And that's when I understood what the secretary meant when he said that Santa Maria was a big city, because the city I went to is a city of 20,000 people, which is very small, very, very small, and like nothing around it. All around, just miles and miles of hills and fields for about like an hour each way by bus. So it was very much in the middle. It was a very small town, very far from everything else, and got there at like 1 in the morning or something. That's when the bus got there, and we took our luggage walked over to our apartment and met the two missionaries that I'd be living with, and that's how it started. So the church in southern Brazil is actually really old. The first missionaries that went to Brazil to serve missions went to southern Brazil to teach among all the German immigrants. Like most of the people I taught and like baptized were actually white. There are a lot of German immigrants. So in the early days of the church in Brazil, missionaries were actually called German-speaking to southern Brazil. And they'd go down there, and there were just tons of German colonies. People would come from Germany, and they teach in German. And the switch wasn't made to Portuguese until like after World War I, actually, until like the 60s, I think. And that's when the missionary work really started exploding, is when they really started working more with everybody, not just the German immigrants. So the church is pretty old in the area. Right now, there are 6 stakes in the Santa Maria mission area. There were 5 when I was serving there. And one of the places I served was a city called Santo Angelo, which was the headquarters for a district. And it has since become a stake, which is really exciting. The nearest temple is in Porto Alegre, which is about 5 hours away, in the capital. So our members would frequently go on trips to Porto Alegre to go see the temple, to go do endowment sessions there, or baptisms. Though like 5 hours away is a little bit far away, it was still really nice. Converts had the opportunity to go to the temple and do baptisms soon after they were baptized, which is really great. The members would usually do overnight trips. They would leave like Friday night to get there Saturday morning. They'd spend all day in the temple and then drive back Saturday night and get there and come to church on Sunday and bear their testimonies about how great it had been to go to the temple. So maybe, I'm not sure why, but this is maybe just due to the culture in southern Brazil. But southern Brazilian missions like Santa Maria, Porto Alegre, North and South, Florianopolis, and Londrina, these missions more in the south of Brazil, they tend to baptize a lot less than the missions in the northeast, like Fortaleza and Recife and those missions. But they tend to have a lot better retention. So that's just, I guess, one of the things that makes Santa Maria and the southern missions a little bit different. Baptize less, but have a lot better retention generally. Well, I absolutely love the food in Brazil, especially in Rio Grande do Sul. It's so good. Like I would be fine just eating the beans and rice they gave me every single day, because it was good. It was very simple but very good. The food in Rio Grande do Sul is generally pretty simple. It's not spicy generally. Kind of the staple of every dish is you'll have your rice and black beans. And then with that, you'll often have some sort of meat. You'll have sausage or like some chicken or beef. And there's a lot of salads, like, well, not as we usually think of salads. They have like a lot of potato salad. And you'll also have like on the side sliced tomatoes and onions. And you'll put those on top of your beans and rice and like eat it all together. So some things that are unique to Rio Grande do Sul, the kind of the rodizio tradition and churrasco, which we see in restaurants like Tucanos and whatnot, actually originated in the region of Rio Grande do Sul. They have tons of cattle there, and so tons of really good meat. And so sometimes on Sundays or on special days, members would they would make that kind of meat for us. A lot of people have what's called a churrasqueira in their backyard, which is kind of like having a barbecue in your backyard here. But it's like a big, like brick kind of fireplace almost, but it's lifted up. And so you'll stick huge chunks of meat on these spits, and they'll put them over the fire, and they'll leave them there for about an hour, and then it's very good. And so that was always really popular with the missionaries whenever the members would do that. I liked that a lot. One of my favorite dishes that people would make, it's very unique to Rio Grande do Sul, is called carreteiro. And so carreteiro, it originated with these cowboys who, like 100 years ago, would be traveling around the countryside in Rio Grande do Sul. So since they were traveling, they couldn't bring like fresh meat with them. So they would bring what's known in Brazil as charque, which is basically like beef jerky, but it's a lot thicker and meatier. But so they'd bring that around with them, and when they'd stop for the night, after a long day of working out in the fields, they would make a fire and put kind of like a big pot cauldron type thing over the fire, like hang it up on a little tripod, and they would fry inside of it this shaki, this meat, along with tomatoes, bell peppers, onions, and a few other things. They'd fry it up until it was nice and good, and then they would throw in the rice. And they'd fry the rice, just the grains, the dry grains, along with it for a little bit, and then they'd throw in water and just let it boil out until the rice was ready. And so you end up with this, like a pot full of rice, but with lots of meat and like some fried vegetables mixed in, and it's really, really good. And people eat that with, like, you'll put sliced cabbage on top of it and eat that, and it is really good. That was one of my favorite dishes from the region that people would make. Another food that was very popular in the winter, especially when it's a little bit colder, is lasagna that they make there. And the lasagna in Brazil is different from the lasagna here. They didn't really use like red sauce. They used a lot of meats like ham and chicken and turkey and stuff, and lots of cheese, and that their lasagnas were really good. And they would also make I think my favorite dessert was definitely pudding. Pudding is a little bit like flan, if you've ever had that, but it's better. It's way better. It's really good. The people in Rio Grande do Sul come from a rich heritage of the gauchos, I guess you'd say, which are the cowboys. You have a lot of these in like Argentina and Uruguay also. So the culture is like, I guess, like a South American version of Texas in a way. In a lot of the smaller cities, a lot of the people I saw were just dressed like gauchos, like kind of cowboys. That's what they did for their jobs. They worked in the fields with horses and cows and whatnot. And so a lot of people will be dressed like that. And you can look up it on Google, see what they look like. There's some funny things about the culture in Rio Grande do Sul, in that state. Whenever you're leaving someone's house, they will always get the door for you. You never get the door for yourself. And so I even do that today sometimes, because I'm like used to people not getting the door for me or like and whatnot. So, or I'll get the door for people when they're leaving, just because I'm still kind of used to that. People in Rio Grande do Sul are generally pretty laid back. A lot of people's day kind of revolves around drinking mate or chimarrão, which is an herb that it's kind of like tea. They have these cups, these wooden cups made out of like gourds, and they'll fill it on one side with this herb that comes from a tree, the erva mate tree. And then they'll fill it up with hot water, and they'll drink it out of this metal straw. And it's kind of a cool cultural thing, because people will drink it like every day. Like they'll have a time every morning when they'll just go in front of their house, like sit down on their chair, and they'll just drink it and like sit there in front of their house, just drinking it up. And it's cool because in the evenings, families will gather around. And so everybody has like beach chairs there that they keep in their house, and you could bring them outside and unfold them and sit down on them. And so in the evenings, especially in the summer, people will bring out their chairs as a family and kind of just sit down, and they'll be drinking the chimarrão, the mate, and just passing around. You'll drink a cup, you'll fill it back up, and you'll pass it on to the next person. And they just kind of sit around and chat. And that's kind of a really cool cultural thing, I think. And it's a good opportunity as missionaries to stop by and say, hey, can we share a quick message with you guys about the gospel? And people are usually pretty laid back and open to hearing a little bit about the gospel. So as far as values, I think what people value most, people would constantly, when we'd be having prayers with people would be constantly thanking the Lord for their health. And they would thank the Lord for their families. I think one of the things that stuck out to me about their culture is a lot of people had very little, but what little they had, they were very willing to share. And that was, I think, something that I definitely learned from the people there. The importance of just sharing and being free with our substance, I guess. I guess one thing I learned is that it's a lot more important to have friends than things. And so when you share your things, you're gonna have more friends, you know? And I think that's something that the people in Brazil understand pretty well generally. So Santa Maria is the biggest city in the mission. It's only the fifth biggest city in the state, though. So it's not a huge city, but it's decent size. It's got about, I think, 270,000 people. There are a few big universities in Santa Maria, so there are a lot of students there. I served in pretty close to the center of Santa Maria, like the centro area of the city. And so kind of half of my area had some really big buildings, and the other half was already kind of like just a lot of small houses and stuff. So people in Santa Maria, they have, I guess, just kind of all the kinds of normal jobs that you do when you are living in a big city. Some people I taught a girl who was she was studying law at the time. She was in law school. And both of her parents were professors at one of the universities. I taught a man who was a mechanic. I taught another student. So lots of students. So as far as weather goes, Santa Maria can get super hot in the summer, because Santa Maria is like kind of, people say it's like in a bowl, and it partially is. Like on one side, there's kind of like this wall of mountains, like not really mountains. They think they're mountains in Brazil because they don't really have mountains there, but like these big foothills, I guess you'd say, on one side that kind of, I guess, trap the air, and so you don't get a lot of wind coming through, so it can get really hot in the summer. And so I was there during the summer months, and during the winter in southern Brazil, it can also get pretty cold. As far as what people do for housing, so there's a lot of income inequality in Brazil. Like, it's one of the most unequal countries in the world, I believe. And so I taught a lot of people that lived in apartment buildings. I taught people that lived in some like really nice apartment buildings that are nicer than most apartment buildings here in the United States. And I taught people in some not so nice apartment buildings. I also taught a ton of people in houses. I taught people that lived in houses that were essentially made of plywood, like very, very humble small houses with just like concrete floors or maybe dirt floors. But at the same time, in this same area in Santa Maria, I would also teach people that had very big houses, bigger than most houses here in the United States. So there's definitely a lot of income inequality, and you see like a very wide spectrum. Definitely the majority of the people lived in not like the huge houses, but they were there, and I did teach people like that. I would say Brazil, especially in the South, I think, has a pretty healthily growing like middle class. So a lot of people would live in just these kind of smallish houses that were built out of brick and then been like cemented over. And nobody really has carpet in Brazil. They all have tile floors. In general, Santa Maria is a really safe place. My whole mission, I never got robbed or threatened with getting robbed, or I never even got something stolen from me, like out of my backpack, anything like that. I was totally fine. I had only heard of, I think, 3 other incidents of missionaries getting robbed. 2 happened while I was on the mission. 1 happened, I had just heard about from people that happened before I was even there on the mission. So it was a very safe area. I really didn't, like, obviously you still want to be safe and like not do anything silly and like put yourself out there to be robbed. But I never really had to worry about being safe or getting robbed or anything like that. It was a pretty safe place. As far as transportation goes, in most of my areas, I just walked. There was only one area where I had to ride a bus, and that was just to get to district meetings because it was a little bit far away. But from where I served in Santa Maria, on our P days, we would walk about 15 minutes to like the very center of the city where they have a big, what they call a calçadão, which means a big sidewalk. And that's where it's like a kind of central shopping area where they have just tons of stores, a huge like sidewalk. It's basically like a road that you can't drive on. People just walk on. There are lots of stores. And that's where we would go to do any shopping we needed to do on P days. There was a grocery store nearby that we would go to, and then we'd usually just carry our groceries home from there. And so the transportation wasn't bad. A lot of the areas that are a little bit farther away from where we were definitely would ride buses here and there. Buses are the main form of transportation in Brazil. Like between areas, between cities, we'd always ride a bus. And so missionaries that were serving in more outlying areas of Santa Maria would have to take buses in for district meetings, but that was only about once a week. I think for the most part, the areas were small enough so that you wouldn't have to take a bus during the day to get to an appointment or another. You could just do most of it walking. I guess food in Santa Maria and like restaurants. There are 2 American restaurants in Santa Maria, and that's the whole mission. We have a Subway and there's a McDonald's, and that's it. But I wouldn't bother going to those anyways because the other food, the Brazilian food, is really good. There are a lot of great churrascarias there. Churrascarias are like Tucanos, that kind of place where they'll cook the meat on big spits over the fire, and they'll bring it around and serve it to you. There are a lot of places like that cost like a third of the amount of Tucanos but taste twice as good. So the restaurant arrangement is pretty nice. The food is really good. Portuguese is a beautiful language. I love Portuguese a lot, and it was an awesome experience to be able to learn Portuguese. It was a lot of fun, very rewarding, as I'm sure it is for any language. And I guess a nice part about it is that it being a Latin-based language, it's not like super hard. Like if you can, like it's not as hard as learning Russian or Chinese or something like that. It's definitely very doable. So Brazilian Portuguese is definitely different than we call Portuguese continental Portuguese. So continental Portuguese is spoken in Portugal, Cape Verde, Mozambique, Angola, and then Brazilian Portuguese is pretty different than the rest. So Brazilian Portuguese is pretty different than continental Portuguese. A lot has to do with the accent, the way you pronounce things, and there are a few things with the words, like ways you say things. There are some slang words that are different, like the way you say cool in Brazil is legal. You say que legal, like that's really cool. Legal is like the literal translation is legal. And so that's so legal, man. I don't know. Whereas in Portugal, the way they'll say cool is fixe. I don't know if there's a little translation to that, but so fiche is never used in Brazil. Like I have Brazilian friends who have never even heard of that word before. And they don't use legal in Portugal as far as I know. Another difference with like the actual structure of how they speak is in Portugal, to say that you are doing something like I am running, you will say estou a correr. Like you say I am to run, basically. Whereas in Portugal, or in Brazilian Portuguese, you use the present progressive, where you'll say estou correndo. So that's, I think, kind of a weird difference. It sounds weird to me when I hear continental Portuguese speakers say that. I just think it's kind of funny. Then some big differences with the accent between continental Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese. One of the biggest ones people will probably mention is the sh. People in continental Portuguese, when there is an S before a consonant, they will make that S like an SH sound. So the verb to be is estar. And so in Brazil we would say estar. But in Portugal they would say estar. And that's one of the biggest differences probably. Another few differences are in Brazilian Portuguese, when you have a DI or a DE at the end of a word, that will make a J sound. So the word for truth is verdade. And in Spanish, you just say verdade. In Portuguese, it's spelled the same, but you have an E at the end, right after the final D, so it's pronounced verdade. Or the word for to say is dizer, spelled D-I-Z-E-R, dizer. And then a similar rule applies for when you have a T-I in the middle of a word or a T-E at the end of a word. So the word for interesting is interessante, and that last little syllable is N-T-E, interessante. And then in the middle of a word, if there's a T-I, so the word for to take something is tirar, spelled T-I-R-A-R, tirar. And so that's different than Continental Portuguese. In Continental Portuguese, you'll pronounce those T-I's and T-E's just like you'll say tirar or interessante or dizer or verdade. So I think those cover the main differences between the two Portugueses. So Brazilian Portuguese varies a lot just because the country Brazil is so big. It's bigger than the continent of the United States. So kind of the slang phrases and terms that people use vary a lot across the country. Some popular phrases that people use in Rio Grande do Sul, in the Santa Maria area, are people say che a lot. Che is like a word that just means like people just throw it in at the end of words. It kind of means like man, that was crazy, or just throw in che just like that. And they also say que barbaridade a lot, which means what barbarity, and it's kind of like oh my gosh, And sometimes that word is just shortened to ba. People just say ba. And there's a lot of other just, I guess, fun phrases, but those I think are two of the most common like regional phrases from Santa Maria and the Rio Grande do Sul state.
What was one of the craziest foods you had in Brazil?
Probably chicken heart, which was actually super good. And also I think I ate cow intestine. That wasn't quite as good.
What was one of the craziest or most dangerous experiences you had?
I think one crazy experience I had was just, we were pretty near our apartment and we were walking along the street and we saw this guy and we decided to start talking to him, and I think he was way drunk because he just started talking about how like nobody needed religion and stuff, and like he got his he had this like, we asked him like, okay, well, if you don't need religion, why are you wearing like a cross necklace right now, And he was like, I don't need this, and so he like took it off his neck and threw it across the street and was like yelling and acting kind of crazy. And my companion, he was like really into just like having cool little trinkets like that, so he was like, sweet, I'm gonna go grab that necklace. And so he went and grabbed it, but we ended up giving it back to the guy because we felt kind of bad. He was like totally drunk, so he probably actually wanted the necklace later.
What was one of the most spiritual experiences you had?
I think most spiritual experience definitely just teaching people, seeing how the gospel could change people's lives when they lived it, when we taught them, invited them, and they came to Christ. It was amazing to see how people's lives could change.
So, language mistake? Any language mistakes you made?
I don't think I made any serious language sins.
One of the greatest lessons you learned on your mission, like a life lesson?
Greatest lesson I think I learned was from my mission president. I just learned that we need to make a difference wherever we are.
One of the best skill you gained on your mission?
Learning how to study, probably.
Craziest weather you experienced?
In one city called Cruz Alta, it was very hilly, and so when it would rain, all the streets would just turn into big rivers. And so we would have to hide out somewhere in somebody's house or something like that.
Best piece of mission prep advice you could give?
Just prepare to love the people. Like everybody says that, but it's really true. If you love the people, you're going to work hard for them.
Any advice you'd give a return missionary just getting home?
keep reading the Book of Mormon every day for a long time. I found that the most successful, people I found that ended up getting baptized, they just came from everywhere. There was no set way to find new investigators. One girl that we baptized, we found her because my companion and I were kind of talking about which way we should go to get home from the mission office, and I guess he was American too, so I guess she could hear that we were speaking, that we were not like Brazilians, that we were speaking Portuguese as a second language, and she spoke English, so she turned around and asked if we needed help. We didn't really need any help because we knew where we were going, but we started walking with her down the street, and we said, well, we're missionaries, and we're teaching people about the gospel. Would you like to have a lesson? And she said yes, and she ended up getting baptized. Other people that ended up getting baptized, one time we were just walking down the street. We were late to lunch, and there was a man on the side of the road, and I just stopped him and I said, hey, can we come into your house and just say a prayer with you real quick? And it turns out that was something he really needed that day, and we came back to his house later in the week, and he ended up getting baptized later too. So I think just opening our mouths wherever we were, just talking to everybody about the gospel was a really big help in finding people to teach that were ready for the gospel. I guess one adjustment for me was learning to not have free time. I think before my mission, I was very used to having a lot of free time. I really enjoyed just reading for pleasure or playing the guitar, just things like that. And there's no time for that on the mission. 0 time. Every hour of your day is scheduled for missionary work. And so that was a tough adjustment for me in the MTC, I think. As far as preparation, what could I have done to prepare more before going into the MTC? I think just the textbook answers of study, preach my gospel more. And maybe I didn't study Portuguese at all before. And now there are a lot of great resources available to, there are a lot of apps for free and things like that where you can start studying the language already. And I think that would be great. I had taken Spanish in high school, which was very helpful because the languages are very similar. But I think it would have been pretty cool to have studied Portuguese a little bit before I went to the MTC, if I could have. Having an opportunity to serve a mission was definitely the greatest blessing in my entire life. I learned so much, and every day today still I am blessed by the knowledge that I gained on my mission. I am so grateful for it. I learned to love other people and serve other people, and learned that the gospel really makes a huge difference in people's lives, and people need it all around the world. And for you who are going to Santa Maria, I am excited for you, and I really hope that you can touch the people there, and I know that you can. The people there are great. They're loving people. The members are great. And there are people out there that really need the gospel. They really, really do. And as we work hard, we'll be able to find them and help them to come to know the truth of the gospel, and they'll be able to have the happiness that we can have from the gospel and the peace, because that's what they're really looking for. I think one of the greatest takeaway from my mission was just that the gospel really changes people's lives, and people really need it. It was just so marvelous to be able to feel the Spirit so much and see it affect other people's lives. I remember at the beginning of my mission, just spending all morning reading the Book of Mormon and wanting to just keep read the Book of Mormon all day, but at the same time wanting to go share it with other people so that they could also read it and feel the Spirit from the Book of Mormon. I had so many marvelous experiences being able to see the gospel just change people's lives. People who had all sorts of issues and doubts in their lives, and when they started reading the scriptures and praying to the Lord and developing a relationship with Him and going to church, really their lives changed, and they testified of it. They could see the huge difference that it made in their lives, and that is the greatest happiness that I think that's ever come to me in my whole life, is just being able to see the gospel change people's lives like that. And often these experiences would only come after like months of, you know, walking around, just working hard, walking around on dusty roads in the middle of nowhere, Brazil, just looking for people to teach. But after these experiences of seeing the gospel change people's lives, I would every time just say to myself, I would do it all again. It would be worth it. I would do it all again, all the hard work with, like, for weeks, seemingly no results, or for months, even seemingly no results. I would do it all again to see this person and the joy that they have in living the gospel, because it is so worth it. It is a lot of hard work, but it is so worth it when we put forth the effort and really try to find people and help people come to know the gospel. It is the greatest blessing that I've had in my life.